So let's have a look at the examples below us right here. So let's apply these steps for this question over here. So we have a function here and we want to actually sketch y is equal to square root of this particular function. Okay, let's use those steps that we had up above and start from the top. So the first thing that we wanted to notice, so step 0 was take the square root of ordinates wherever possible. So let's have a look at y values that we see in this graph. Now, there's only one y value that I can kind of notice here, which is up here, y is equal to 4. So wherever y is equal to 4, I notice that here at this point there's y is equal to 4. So I need to take the square root of that. So square root 4. So I'm going to square root 4, which will give me 2. So when x is equal to 0, I'm going to have at y-intercept at 2 instead of 4. So wherever you see y values, you're going to take the square root of it. So that's this first one. That's an ordinates part. So wherever you see y values, take the square root of it whenever possible. Now I can also apply this in the further, because if you notice there's an asymptote here, and so instead of approaching 4 when x goes to infinity, my square root graph is going to approach 2. So this is y is equal to 2. So when x goes to infinity, our square root graph is going to go towards 2, because if you notice in our original graph, it's going towards 4. So in my square root graph, it's going to go towards this 2 instead, because I square rooted the 4. Okay, so that's at 0th dot point. So take the square root of ordinates whenever possible. Okay, the second dot point, it says to delete anything below the x-axis. X-axis is over here. So I'm going to see wherever the graph is below the x-axis, and I'm going to delete all those points there. So if you notice, there's on the left of -4, I've got stuff below the x-axis, so my graph of my square root function is not going to have anything there. And in the same way, between -4 and 2, we've got stuff below the x-axis, so I'm going to delete that as well. So I'm not going to worry about those two parts there. So that is the next part. So if you see anything below the x-axis, you're going to get rid of it and delete it. Okay. That is that first dot point. So delete anything below the x-axis. I'm going to color match it so we have it matching those points that we had up above. So anything below the x-axis, we're going to delete it. Second dot point. So when f of x is equal to 0, f of x is equal to 0 or 1, r of x is also equal to 0 or 1. So what this means is wherever I see on the graph, I have an x-intercept. On my square root graph, I'm also going to have an x-intercept. So where do I see x-intercepts? Well, I see a point here at -4, so I'm going to have a point at -4 all by itself. There's no graph either side of it. Where else do I see x-intercepts? Well, I also see an x-intercept at -2, so I'm going to put a dot there, because I know that my graph, wherever I see wherever I see an x-intercept in my original function, my square root function is also going to have an x-intercept. That's where y is equal to 0. And I also have one at 2. Okay, there we go. Those are those points where it's equal to 0. This function is equal to 0 at those points. That's the first part. The second part is to find the points where the function is equal to 1. So I'm trying to look at this y is equal to 1 line. So it's actually dotted out for me here. And see where my function touches that point. So if you have a look, there's actually 3 points where my function touches this point. So it's 1 here, and 1 here. So my function is going to touch f of x. My square root function is going to touch at those points. Wherever it's 0 or 1, so whenever the y values are 0 or 1, my square root function is also going to be equal to 0 or 1 at that point. So that's that second dot point there. Wherever f of x is equal to 0 or 1, r of x is also equal to 0 or 1. Okay, next dot point. When f of x is above the y-axis, the curve of r of x is below f of x. So wherever we have our graph is above, above 1, we're going to have our reciprocal, or our square root function below the f of x. So if you have a look, we're just looking for all the points which is above y is equal to 1. I'm looking for all the points above here. So what this would mean is that my graph above this is going to be below these lines here. I'm going to be below these lines. So here, let me just draw it out a bit. So I'm going to be below this line. So I want to be below it. So there we go on that side. And on this side, I want to be below these lines here actually. So I'm going to actually have something that looks like this, because I have that point at 2. So it's going to be below those points. So if my original function is bigger than 1, I have points that are below there at those given points. And that's what I've drawn here. Okay. So that was that third dot point there. Now the final one is if f of x is between 1, y is equal to 1 and the x-axis, so between 0 and 1, we're going to be above. So in orange, if you have a look, there's bits here where it's between 0 and 1. So what this means is that my final function is going to actually be above those points. So what that means is here is the original function. There in orange. The final function is going to be above it. So here it's going to be above that. It's going to be above, and hang on, let me draw it a little bit better. So it's going to be above, and it kind of wants to curve like that. So it's going to be above. And actually, once I've done all of that, I've actually drawn all the points because I've also dealt with my asymptote earlier. So let me try redraw this in one go using all those points I have. Erase all of that, erase that. So let's put this all together into one graph. Okay. Now I've drawn on my asymptote, I've drawn on my zeros and my ones. I'm just going to draw this final graph all in one go in red. Okay, I'm going to put this in red. Okay, so I've got a point at 2. I've got my zeros, I've got my ones, I've got my zeros and my 1. Okay. So on the left-hand side, -4, I've just got a 0 there. I've got nothing either side because everything is below the x-axis. Between 0 and 1, that is below 1 and above 0 and below 1. So my graph is going to be above the original graph. Between -1 and 2, that is above 1. So I'm going to go below my new graph. I'm going to reach 2 because that was the square root of 4. So this 4 goes down to 2. And then below, reach my 1 because that's where y is equal to 1. And then because the next section of my graph is between 0 and 1 for the y value, I'm just going to go above it. And then go across from here. And then after that, I'm going to go towards 2 because that was my new asymptote from up here. That asymptote is going to go down. Okay. And so this is my graph. The one in red, the stuff in red, this is y is equal to square root of f of x. Okay, cool. And there we go. Hopefully, that might have been a little bit tricky. So if you need to go back and rewatch any of the parts where I went through a particular thing, have a go through that again. I'm more than happy for you to just watch it again and try to break it down a little bit more. But this is my graph, y is equal to square root of f of x.